Hello and welcome to the Friday Show with CJ Werleman, presented by Inside Arabia. I'm your host, CJ Werleman. Thank you for joining us here today and every Friday for a breakdown of some of Inside Arabia's coverage and analysis on the MENA region. And make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a single episode. Our coverage this Friday looks at why the United States should force Israel to choose between the Chinese Yuan and US military aid. We then examine why the Turkish government has thrown in the towel on the trial of slain journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And finally, we examine how Ethiopia is exacerbating tensions with Egypt and Sudan over its new electricity generating project in the Nile River. Now let's get started. We begin with my most recent article, which looks at Israel's recent move to add the Chinese yuan to its reserve holdings for the first time, adding the Middle Eastern country to a small but growing list of countries that have recently reduced their exposure to the US dollar. Until now, Israel's central bank held only US dollars, euros and the British pound, but will add the yuan along with the Australian dollar and Canadian dollar to a foreign currency stockpile that has surpassed $200 billion. This is happening at the same time as the US dollar's share of total global currency reserves is at its lowest point in over 2 decades, adding to growing fears that the US currency is losing its status as the go-to reserve currency, particularly because US adversaries China and Russia have made no secret of their intent to undermine the US dollar. Make no mistake, this is a big deal because any sell-off of the dollar not only threatens its reserve currency status, but also the wider US economy, because inflation will really skyrocket should other countries start dumping dollars, causing interest rates to soar for American home mortgage owners and therefore triggering a total collapse of the property and stock markets. This brings into view the so-called special relationship between Israel and the United States. Because the world is truly locked in a new Cold War between democracy and authoritarianism, as President Biden so often proclaims, then Israel, the United States' so-called ally, is willingly advancing China's geopolitical interests to the detriment of the United States. Now, to be clear, Israel is a sovereign nation, and it has every right to make whatever decisions it determines to be consistent with its national and strategic interests. And if that includes reducing its dollar holdings and replacing it with the Chinese yuan, then so be it. But equally, the United States is a sovereign nation, and it too has every right to make whatever decisions it determines to be consistent with its national and strategic interests. So with that in mind, one must ask, how does the $3.8 billion US taxpayers contribute towards the Israeli military each year sit within the logic of advancing US interests? The short answer, it doesn't, and therefore the US should rethink its military aid to Israel. We shift now to a recent piece by Elizabeth Myers, in which she outlines reasons why the Turkish government has given up the pursuit for justice and accountability in the trial of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was brutally murdered and dismembered on Turkish soil by members of a Saudi government hit squad in 2018. For the past few years, Turkey has promised to hold Khashoggi's killers responsible for his murder. But on April 7th, a Turkish court granted the Saudi government's request to transfer the trial to Saudi Arabia in a move roundly condemned by human rights activists, who rightly claim this is the end of accountability for the Saudi hit squad and the mastermind behind it. But as Myers rightly points out, Turkey's decision to wash its hands of the trial comes at the same time Ankara is seeking to mend ties with Riyadh, as highlighted by President Erdogan's first visit to Saudi Arabia since the Khashoggi killing. In other words, this realignment demonstrates a continuing fragility and subservience of any principled adherence to justice, human rights, and the rule of law to pragmatic geopolitical concerns, or in other words, just business as usual. Finally, we come to Jonathan Fenton Harvey's analysis on growing tensions along the Nile River, which have been sparked by the Ethiopian government's move to generate electricity from one of its 13 turbines in its ongoing dam project along the Nile, producing a capacity of 375 megawatts. This has ignited fears that a war over water could break out in the region, given Egypt and Sudan have warned that Ethiopia's actions threaten their access to the Nile's waters, constituting a breach of a 2015 agreement over the Nile between the 3 African countries. You see, the parts of the Nile that run through Ethiopia provide the river system with more than 85% of its water, meaning that Ethiopia's dam construction project would, without a doubt, create water restrictions for both Egypt and Sudan. What's truly worrying is that efforts to mediate the dispute have fallen flat, with the African Union halting its mediation between the conflicting parties in April of 2021. And as Fenton Harvey notes, with limited pressure on Ethiopia to accept a compromise, the chances of a spiraling dispute in the future could be very real. You can find all 3 of these articles and more on InsideArabia.com. And make sure to follow Inside Arabia on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. That's my time for today. This has been the Friday Show with CJ Wellerman. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week, same day and same channel.